It was a little after 2 in the morning when my phone started exploding with security alerts, the kind that jolt you awake before your brain even understands what's happening. I grabbed it off the nightstand, still half asleep, and froze when I saw the notification I never expected to read. Motion detected inside vehicle. My first instinct was to assume it was a glitch. That car had been parked on the street outside my house for years without a single issue. No decals, no lights, no special plates, nothing that stood out. Just a plain gray sedan sitting in a quiet, forgettable neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Then I opened the live camera feed. That's when my stomach dropped. Standing next to my car was Elaine Parker, the HOA president, shining a flashlight through the windows like she owned the place. I watched in disbelief as she tried the door handle, glanced around, and pulled out a slim metal tool. A few quick movements later, the lock gave way. She opened the door and climbed inside my car. Not to leave a warning, not to take pictures. She searched it, slowly, confidently, like she had every right to be there. What Elaine didn't know was that this wasn't just some random neighbor's vehicle she felt entitled to inspect. It was federal property tied to active work. And the second she forced that lock, this stopped being an HOA problem. Because federal charges aren't optional. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I moved to Red Willow Ridge for one simple reason. Quiet. My work demanded it. Chaos wasn't just inconvenient for me, it was dangerous. I worked strange hours, came and went at odd times, and sometimes disappeared for days without warning. I needed a place where nobody cared enough to ask questions, a neighborhood where people nodded politely and went back inside. Red Willow Ridge was exactly that, at least in the beginning. It was the kind of place real estate agents describe as peaceful and well-maintained. Identical houses, neutral colors, lawns trimmed to regulation height, an HOA that existed mostly on paper, collecting dues and sending out the occasional reminder about trash cans or holiday decorations. Nobody bothered me. Nobody paid attention to my schedule. And I liked it that way. I followed every rule, even the petty ones. Dues paid on time, yard clean, no noise complaints. I blended in, which was the whole point. For a long time, my name never came up at HOA meetings, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Then, Elaine Parker moved in. Elaine didn't quietly unpack boxes and introduce herself with a smile. She arrived like she was taking over a hostile territory. Within her first few weeks, she had already memorized the HOA handbook and started acting like enforcement was her personal mission. I'd see printed rule sheets taped to doors as I left for work. I overheard her lecturing delivery drivers about where they could park. Once, I watched her crouch in a neighbor's yard with a ruler, measuring grass height like she was gathering evidence for a trial. She didn't see the HOA as a community. She saw it as a power structure, and she wanted to sit at the top. It didn't take long for her to get there. Elaine volunteered for committees no one cared about, spoke louder than everyone else at meetings, and framed every disagreement as a threat to property values. Within months, she was HOA president. That's when things stopped being mildly annoying and started feeling aggressive. Elaine found her favorite target quickly: vehicles. She became obsessed with what looked out of place. Trucks were suspicious, vans were unacceptable, cars parked a few hours too long were suddenly violations. She talked about neighborhood image like it was under constant attack, and she positioned herself as the only person brave enough to defend it. That's when my car caught her attention. It wasn't new. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't broken down or leaking oil. It didn't violate a single written rule. It was just boring. A plain, gray sedan. that didn't draw attention, exactly the way I wanted it. But Elaine couldn't figure it out. She couldn't tell who it belonged to, and she couldn't categorize it into one of her neat little rule boxes. It wasn't a resident's flashy weekend toy. It wasn't clearly a work truck. It didn't scream anything at all. And that bothered her more than an actual violation ever could. The first note appeared under the windshield wiper one morning when I came out to leave for work. It was polite on the surface, but loaded underneath. Unidentified vehicle, it read. Please contact the HOA to verify compliance. I checked the HOA documents that night. Street parking fell under county jurisdiction, not HOA control. The car was registered, insured, and fully legal. There was nothing to verify. I ignored it. A few days later, another notice appeared. This one used the word abandoned. That actually made me laugh. I drove the car daily, sometimes multiple times a day. This time, I emailed the HOA board. Calm, professional. I cited the relevant sections of the rules and explained that the street was not HOA property. I didn't mention my job. I didn't threaten anything. I assumed logic would be enough. Elaine replied within minutes. She claimed the HOA had discretionary authority to remove vehicles that made residents uncomfortable. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't about rules, it was about control. To avoid escalating things, I moved the car into my driveway for a few days. I figured she'd get bored and move on to someone else. She didn't. She saw it as a win. The next time I parked on the street, another warning appeared, then another, each one more aggressive than the last. Elaine started circling the car when she thought no one was watching, taking photos from different angles, standing there with her arms crossed like she was daring someone to challenge her. Neighbors noticed. A couple of them apologized quietly, telling me she'd already gone after their vehicles, too. They warned me she didn't like being told no. What none of us realized yet was that Elaine wasn't just enforcing imaginary rules anymore. She was looking for an excuse, and she was getting more confident by the day. The first warning showed up like it was trying to be reasonable. A clean, printed slip tucked neatly under my windshield wiper, politely informing me that my vehicle was unidentified and asking me to contact the HOA to verify compliance. No threats, no deadlines. Just enough authority in the wording to make it feel official. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and reread the HOA rules line by line. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't assuming. Street parking clearly fell under county jurisdiction, not HOA control. The car was legally registered, insured, and fully operational. There was nothing even remotely questionable about it. So I did nothing. A few days later, the second notice appeared. This one dropped the polite tone entirely. Now the vehicle was labeled abandoned. That actually made me laugh out loud. I had driven it that same morning. The engine was warm when I parked it. That was my first hint that logic wasn't going to matter here. I decided to handle it the adult way. I emailed the HOA board, not just Elaine. I kept it calm and factual, attached screenshots of the relevant sections of the HOA documents, and explained that the street was not HOA property. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I didn't mention my job or anything about the car beyond what was necessary. I assumed someone reasonable would shut it down. Instead, Elaine replied personally. Her email came back fast, confident, and completely detached from reality. She claimed the HOA had discretionary authority to remove any vehicle that appeared suspicious or made residents uncomfortable. She didn't cite a rule. She didn't reference a section. She just stated it like it was obvious. It wasn't just wrong. It was a lie. A bold one. At that moment, I realized this wasn't about enforcing written rules. It was about Elaine deciding what she thought should be allowed and daring someone to challenge her. Still, I didn't want this turning into a daily war. Attention was the last thing I needed. So I compromised. I moved the car into my driveway for a few days, not because I had to, but because I wanted the situation to cool off. I figured once she lost her target, she'd move on to someone else's mailbox or lawn decorations. Instead, she took it as confirmation that she was right. The next time I parked on the street, the warning came back immediately. Same language, same accusation. This time, there was a deadline printed in bold, threatening towing if the issue wasn't resolved. Elaine started getting bolder. I caught her walking slow circles around the car, phone in hand, taking pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. She didn't even pretend to be subtle. She wanted me to see her watching. Neighbors noticed too. One of them pulled me aside and quietly warned me that Elaine had already gone after several people over parking. Another told me she bragged about cleaning up the street. A third admitted they'd stopped parking their work truck outside altogether just to avoid dealing with her. The pattern was clear. If you pushed back, she escalated. A week later, work pulled me out of town unexpectedly. Long days, late nights, exhaustion stacked on top of exhaustion. When I came home after midnight, the last thing on my mind was rearranging cars. I parked on the street without a second thought. That was all the excuse Elaine needed. Because at that point, warnings weren't enough for her anymore. Emails weren't enough. Pretending to enforce rules wasn't giving her the control she wanted. She had decided that if she couldn't intimidate me into compliance, she'd remove the problem herself, and she was convinced that nothing would happen to her if she did. I pulled into the neighborhood just before 2 in the morning, exhausted enough that everything felt slightly out of focus. Even so, I knew something was wrong the second my headlights swept across the street. There was an empty space where my car should have been. Not a broken-down vehicle, not a neighbor parked crooked. Just bare asphalt, lit by a street lamp, like the car had never been there at all. For a few seconds, I sat there with the engine running, replaying the day in my head, wondering if I'd parked somewhere else without remembering. I hadn't. I knew exactly where I'd left it. I shut off the engine and called non-emergency dispatch. I kept my voice neutral, gave them the plate number, and waited. A moment later, the dispatcher came back and confirmed it. The vehicle had been towed at the request of the HOA and taken by Desert Valley Recovery. The reason listed was abandoned vehicle. Hearing that word again didn't make me angry. It made something click into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was intentional. I drove straight to the impound lot. No arguments, no speeches. I paid the release fee without a word. The guy at the counter didn't look surprised. He slid the paperwork across, and I noticed Elaine's name signed on the authorization line. Confident, official, like she'd done this 100 times before. When I got the car back, I didn't drive home right away. I did what I always do. I checked it. At first, everything looked normal. No broken windows, no obvious damage. Then I leaned closer to the driver's side door and saw it. Fine scratches around the lock, the kind you only notice if you're trained to notice them. Fresh. Precise. The lock had been forced. I opened the door and felt it immediately. Something was off. The glove box was open. Papers were shifted, not scattered, but clearly moved by someone who knew what they were looking for. The center console didn't sit quite right. The interior light came on, and I just stood there for a moment, letting the realization settle in. Someone had been inside my car. Not a tow truck driver doing his job. Not a mistake. Someone had unlocked it and searched it. I drove home slowly, hyper-aware of every sound, every reflection. Once in the garage, I shut the door and went through the vehicle inch by inch. Nothing was missing. Nothing obvious was compromised, but the violation was unmistakable. That was the moment the situation changed completely. Up until then, I'd been dealing with this as a homeowner trying to avoid drama with an overreaching HOA. I'd been patient, careful, willing to compromise. But this wasn't a parking dispute anymore. This was unauthorized access, forced entry, tampering. I didn't get angry. I didn't pace. I didn't rant to friends. I did what training had taught me to do when something crossed a line. I documented everything. Photos of the lock, close-ups of the scratches, wide shots of the interior, timestamps, tow paperwork, Elaine's signature. I pulled the security camera logs and noted the time window between when I parked and when the car was towed. Every detail mattered now, because once someone breaks into a vehicle tied to my work, the consequences aren't optional. They aren't negotiable. They don't disappear with an apology or an HOA vote. Standing there in my garage, looking at that forced lock, I stopped being a guy trying to keep the peace in his neighborhood. I became a professional responding to a security breach, and from that moment on, Elaine wasn't dealing with a resident anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my living room with the lights off, laptop open, watching the security footage over and over again. I wasn't hoping to find something new. I already knew what I'd seen. I was confirming it, frame by frame, the way professionals do when the truth matters more than emotions. The footage started a little after 2 in the morning. Elaine's white SUV rolled into frame first and parked a short distance away from my car. She didn't rush. She didn't look nervous. She moved like someone who believed she had every right to be there. She walked slow circles around the car, phone in hand, snapping photos from different angles. Front plate, rear plate, side profile, close-ups of the windshield. Then she tested the door handle. Once. Twice. When it didn't open, she glanced up and down the street, not in panic, but in irritation, like the car was inconveniencing her. That's when she reached into her pocket and pulled out a slim metal tool. She crouched slightly, shielded by her body, and worked the driver's side lock with practiced movements. It took only a few seconds. The lock popped. She opened the door and leaned inside, then climbed fully into the driver's seat. The flashlight came on, and the beam moved deliberately, not randomly. She opened the glove box. She flipped through papers. She leaned across the center console, checking compartments like she was looking for something specific. She stayed inside the car for several minutes. Not once did she look unsure. Not once did she hesitate. She wasn't afraid of being caught because, in her mind, she wasn't doing anything wrong. She believed her HOA title gave her permission to do whatever she wanted. Then the tow truck arrived. Elaine stepped out of the car, closed the door carefully, and waved the driver over like a supervisor on a job site. She spoke to him, pointed at the car, and stepped back while he hooked it up. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching my car disappear down the street. I sat there in silence when the footage ended. This wasn't a gray area. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a petty HOA dispute that got out of hand. This was forced entry, search, and coordination with a tow company under false pretenses. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't confront Elaine. I didn't even contact the HOA board again. I called my supervisor, Special Agent Laura McKenna, answered on the second ring. I told her I had footage of unauthorized access to a work vehicle and sent the file immediately. There was a long pause while she watched it. She didn't ask if I was angry. She didn't ask if I wanted to file a complaint. Her first question was calm and direct. Was the vehicle compromised? I told her the truth. No equipment was stored inside overnight, no classified material, no electronics beyond what was standard. But the vehicle itself had been entered without authorization, and paperwork had been moved. That was all she needed to hear. Laura told me to secure the car, document everything, and stand by. Within the hour, I received instructions from the evidence response team. By sunrise, this was no longer just my problem. Federal procedures don't move loudly, but they move fast. Investigators pulled the tow authorization records. Elaine's name was on the paperwork, along with a false claim that the vehicle was abandoned and unlocked. The tow company was contacted. Statements were taken. Timelines were built. The footage I captured became the spine of the entire case. It showed intent. It showed action. It showed confidence. Most importantly, it showed that Elaine wasn't enforcing rules. She was pretending to be law enforcement. By mid-morning, the car was processed as a compromised asset. Photos were taken. Lock damage documented. Interior condition logged. Everything Elaine touched was accounted for. The evidence team didn't speculate. They didn't dramatize. They simply followed procedure, and procedure was devastating. Because the moment Elaine forced that lock, she crossed into a world where intent matters less than action. She didn't need to know it was federal property for the consequences to apply. Ignorance isn't a shield when you commit a felony. What struck me the most wasn't the seriousness of the response. It was how routine it all felt. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't personal. This was just how the system responds when someone interferes with protected property. Meanwhile, Elaine went on with her life. She posted on the HOA page about cleaning up the street. She bragged about enforcing standards. She probably slept well that night, convinced she'd won another little battle. She had no idea that by lunchtime the next day, her name was on multiple reports. Her footage was being reviewed by prosecutors. Her authority, which had always existed only in her own head, had collided with something real. And real authority doesn't argue. It documents, escalates, and waits. Elaine thought she had triggered a tow. What she actually triggered was a chain of events she could not stop, explain away, or vote herself out of. By the time she realized that, it was already far too late. By the time the sun came up, the situation had already moved past anything Elaine could control. Local police were looped in first, then quietly stepped back as federal investigators took the lead. There was no drama, no flashing lights outside my house, no announcements, just phone calls, emails, and a steady tightening of the net. The tow company was contacted early that morning. At first, they treated it like routine business. Another HOA complaint. Another vehicle removal. But when investigators asked for the authorization paperwork, the tone shifted. The manager pulled the file, scanned it, and went quiet. Elaine's name was right there on the request, signed clearly, authorizing the tow. Next to it were the boxes she had checked herself. Vehicle abandoned. Vehicle unlocked. Immediate removal authorized. Every single one of those statements was false. That single document did more damage than any argument ever could. It established intent. It showed that Elaine hadn't just misunderstood a rule or made a judgment call. She had knowingly provided false information to justify towing a vehicle she wanted gone. Investigators didn't speculate. They verified. The car wasn't abandoned. Records showed daily use. The car wasn't unlocked. The forced entry marks and footage proved otherwise, and Elaine had no legal authority over the street in the first place. That paperwork alone was enough to collapse her entire narrative. When Elaine was contacted for a statement, she tried to pivot. She leaned hard into the language she'd been using for months. She said she was verifying compliance. She claimed she believed the HOA had discretionary authority. She framed herself as a concerned leader protecting the neighborhood. It didn't land. Federal investigators aren't interested in vibes or intentions. They don't care how confident someone feels while doing something illegal. They care about jurisdiction, authority, and evidence. Elaine had none of the first two, and the evidence was overwhelming. She wasn't asked hypothetical questions. She was shown footage. She was shown documents. She was asked to explain why she forced entry into a locked vehicle she did not own, on property she did not control, using false statements to a tow company to justify removal. Her answers didn't matter much at that point. The illusion she had built around herself began to crack fast. The same confidence that made her bold in the neighborhood worked against her now. She spoke too freely. She assumed she could explain her way out of it. She treated the interview like an HOA meeting where she could talk long enough to wear people down. That doesn't work when the rules are real. Prosecutors reviewed the case methodically. They didn't rush. They didn't dramatize. They categorized the charges based on actions, not titles. Unauthorized access, false statements, vehicle tampering, coordination under false pretenses. Elaine's HOA position wasn't a shield. It was irrelevant. In fact, it made things worse, because she wasn't just a random person breaking into a car. She was someone abusing a perceived position of authority to justify criminal behavior. That distinction mattered. It showed intent, confidence, and a pattern of overreach. Meanwhile, the HOA board began to panic. Members started emailing me, apologizing, distancing themselves from Elaine's decisions. Some claimed they had no idea she was towing vehicles at night. Others insisted she acted alone. The tone shifted from smug enforcement to damage control almost overnight. Elaine tried to rally support. She posted vague statements about being misunderstood and standing strong. But the comments were different now. People asked questions she couldn't answer. Why was she out there at 2 in the morning? Why did she have tools? Why did she sign paperwork that wasn't true? There were no good answers. Behind the scenes, the case solidified. Federal prosecutors didn't debate whether Elaine meant well. They didn't care if she thought she was right. The law doesn't bend for people who confuse confidence with permission. Authority without jurisdiction is just trespassing with confidence. Elaine had spent months acting like rules were whatever she said they were. She believed enforcement came from attitude and persistence. She believed people backed down because she was right. What she never understood was that real authority doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't posture. It documents, verifies, and proceeds. By the time charges were finalized, Elaine's control over the situation was gone completely. She couldn't vote it away. She couldn't rewrite it. She couldn't intimidate her way out. The same system she thought she was above had quietly closed in around her, and the collapse wasn't loud. It was official. It happened early in the morning, just after sunrise, when the street was quiet enough that every sound carried. I wasn't watching from behind a curtain or refreshing a camera feed this time. I heard it the old-fashioned way. Car doors closing, measured footsteps, voices kept low but firm. When I stepped onto my porch, I saw unmarked vehicles lining the curb and federal agents standing at Elaine Parker's front door. Neighbors started to appear one by one, pretending to check their mail or take out trash, all of them drawn by the same instinct. Nobody said anything out loud, but everyone understood what they were seeing. This wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was real. Elaine came out a few minutes later, escorted by agents on either side of her. She wasn't wearing her usual confident expression. No clipboard, no phone in her hand. Just a stunned look, like someone waking up from a dream and realizing too late that it was a nightmare. Her wrists were cuffed, calmly, professionally. No yelling, no drama, just procedure. That was the last time anyone in Red Willow Ridge saw her as HOA president. The case moved quickly after that. There were no delays, no grandstanding. When the court date arrived, I took my seat quietly and watched as everything Elaine had tried to deny was laid out piece by piece. The courtroom wasn't interested in her intentions or how strongly she believed she was right. It was interested in facts. The footage played on a massive screen. There was Elaine, clear as day, circling my car in the early morning darkness. Elaine testing the handle, Elaine pulling out the tool, Elaine forcing the lock, Elaine climbing inside and searching through the interior like she had a badge to back it up. The room was silent while it played. No speeches followed it, no emotional appeals, no arguments that could compete with reality. The video spoke for itself. The tow authorization paperwork followed, her signature, the false statements, the timeline. The evidence stacked neatly, methodically, until there was nowhere left to hide. Elaine's lawyer tried. He argued confusion. He argued overreach. He argued that she believed she had authority. But belief doesn't change jurisdiction, and confidence doesn't rewrite law. When it was Elaine's turn to speak, her voice cracked. She talked about protecting the neighborhood, about property values, about feeling responsible. It sounded almost convincing until the footage was replayed in everyone's mind. Protecting something doesn't require breaking into it. Responsibility doesn't involve lying on official paperwork. The jury didn't take long. When they came back, no one looked surprised. Guilty, federal tampering, state burglary. The words landed heavy, even in a room that had expected them. Elaine broke down then, not quietly, not with dignity. She cried openly, shaking, the reality finally sinking in that this wasn't an HOA meeting she could dominate. This was a record she would carry for the rest of her life. Outside the courtroom, news traveled fast. Back in Red Willow Ridge, the HOA board resigned within days. Emails went out full of apologies and reassurances. Meetings were canceled. Committees dissolved. The rule sheets that had once appeared on doors stopped showing up overnight. The neighborhood changed almost immediately. People parked where they needed to. Kids rode bikes without being yelled at. Work trucks returned to driveways. The constant tension that had hung over the street like static finally drained away. Silence fell over Red Willow Ridge. Not the uneasy silence of fear, but the calm that comes after something toxic is removed. The kind of quiet the neighborhood was always supposed to have. Elaine was gone. Her authority, which had never truly existed, was stripped down to what it always was. An illusion held together by confidence and other people's reluctance to push back. Watching it all end, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. What I felt was relief. Relief that evidence mattered. Relief that the system worked exactly the way it was designed to when someone crossed a line and refused to stop. Elaine had spent months believing she was untouchable. The verdict proved otherwise. And in the end, Red Willow Ridge didn't need rules enforced by fear anymore. It just needed the truth to be seen. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It rolled in quietly, like a tide receding and leaving everything exposed. In the days after the verdict, the HOA went silent. No emails, no posts, no warnings taped to doors. It was as if the organization itself needed time to process what had just happened. Then the apologies started. First came the official letter from the HOA board, carefully worded and clearly written by a lawyer. It acknowledged serious overreach, admitted that actions had been taken without proper authority, and apologized for the stress caused to residents. My name wasn't singled out, but everyone knew who it was really for. A second email followed, announcing that the board had dissolved and that a temporary administrator would oversee a reset. Not long after, a new president was elected. Daniel Cross didn't campaign. He didn't promise to clean things up or restore order. He was a retired Coast Guard officer who had lived in the neighborhood for years without ever wanting the job. When he finally agreed to step in, he did it the way he'd clearly done everything else in his life, quietly and with purpose. His first move was to dismantle Elaine's enforcement system completely. Overnight towing was banned. Random inspections were eliminated. Any rule that relied on vague language like appearance or suspicion was rewritten or removed. Authority was clearly defined, and anything outside that scope was off limits. He sent a simple message to the neighborhood. The HOA existed to serve residents, not control them. For the first time in a long while, people believed it. My car went back into service shortly after, fitted with upgraded locks and enhanced security. The process was methodical and uneventful, exactly how I preferred things. When I parked it on the street again, nothing happened. No notes, no photos, no one hovering nearby pretending to enforce something that didn't exist. That alone felt surreal. Neighbors started talking again, really talking. Conversations that had once happened in whispers now happened openly. One by one, people admitted they'd been scared of Elaine. Not just annoyed, but genuinely afraid of crossing her. They told stories about warnings that made no sense, fines that appeared without explanation, threats of towing over technicalities no one understood. Most of them had backed down because it was easier, because they didn't want the attention, because they assumed fighting back would only make things worse. They weren't wrong. Elaine had thrived on that silence. She'd counted on people being too tired or too busy to challenge her. Once that silence broke, the illusion fell apart. Slowly, the neighborhood started to feel different. Cars parked where they needed to without fear of waking up to a tow notice. Lawns looked like lawns again, not inspection zones. Kids played without being shooed away for imaginary violations. People lingered outside and talked instead of rushing indoors. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. As for Elaine, her house sat empty for a long time. The blinds stayed drawn, mail piled up before finally stopping altogether. Eventually, the property went up for sale. No farewell note, no explanation. Just a quiet exit from a place she had tried so hard to dominate. I never saw her again. What stayed with me most wasn't the legal victory or the outcome in court. It was the way a community changed once fear was removed. People didn't become rebellious or careless. They became reasonable, cooperative, normal. The HOA, stripped of its false authority, became what it was always meant to be: a tool, not a weapon. Red Willow Ridge healed not because someone won, but because something unhealthy was taken away. The rules stopped being about control and started being about coexistence. And for the first time since Elaine had arrived, the neighborhood felt like a place people actually wanted to live. Elaine believed power came from a title and a clipboard. She believed that memorizing rules and repeating them loudly enough made her untouchable. For a long time, that illusion worked, because people don't like conflict and most of us just want to get through our days without becoming a target. What she learned the hard way is that real authority doesn't need to posture. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't argue in emails or intimidate people in the dark. Real authority documents what happened, verifies the facts, and waits patiently for the truth to do its job. This was never about revenge or winning some personal feud. It was about lines that exist for a reason. Once you cross them, intent doesn't matter anymore. Titles don't protect you. Votes don't erase consequences. And confidence doesn't turn illegal actions into legal ones. Red Willow Ridge is quiet again, the way it was always meant to be. Cars sit on the street without worry. Neighbors wave instead of watching over their shoulders. The tension that once hung in the air is gone, replaced by something simple and familiar. Normal life. Every time I park that unmarked car outside, I think about how close this came to being dismissed as just an HOA issue. How easily it could have gone unchecked if there hadn't been cameras, documentation, and patience. It's a reminder that preparation matters, even when the threat looks small, because arrogance is loud. It makes noise, demands attention, and assumes it will never be challenged. Accountability is quieter, but it always shows up in the end. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?